project ComAct. The project ComAct is focusing on mitigating energy poverty while tailoring communities, and we have pilot projects in 5 Eastern and Central European countries, where we try to see the ways and new methods how to mitigate energy poverty there. And today would like to share our knowledge and also have an exchange with other colleagues, partners working in the same field, and talk about multiple benefits which are relevant for the most vulnerable. Today, we are very glad to have a really great panel with great speakers. And I would like to introduce you first. Speaker and the moderator of today's event is Marilyn Smith. She's Executive Director at Energy Action Project, and has very long, great experience working on the issues on energy poverty, and she believes that everybody have to have access to the affordable and sustainable energy. So, we're really glad to have you today. The second presentation and the second speaker is Judith Kotskat. She's coming from, she's a project manager from BPE, and she has been working on different projects over the last 5 years. And one of these projects is the multiple benefits of energy efficiency, a really great project already finished. And we are keen to hear what kind of benefits have been indicated here, and we'll see how they how we can use them for energy poor. Then we will hear Liliana Altseva from North Macedonia. She's a deputy director of Habitat for Humanity, and we'll talk about the benefits of energy efficiency which are relevant in North Macedonia. And after that, the Esther Turay from Metropolitan Research Institute will introduce us insights from the household survey, which was done last year in our pilot countries, targeted countries of ComAct project. So we'll have a chance to hear real statistics and real feedback which the vulnerable households give us on energy efficiency. And the last but not least, we have today Nina Campbell from New Zealand. She's a senior policy advisor at New Zealand Ministry for Energy Resources, but she was working as in International Energy Agency, where also energy poverty was a big topic already in 2015, and this also will be interesting to hear what kind of progress has been achieved until today, and also to hear what kind of policies exist in New Zealand on mitigating energy poverty. And I hope we will still have time after such a full agenda for the discussion, so I'll invite everybody to keep on the time. And also for the audience, we invite to give your questions in a Q&A box, which you can see on your screen, on the bottom of your screen. And just the last remark that this webinar is being recorded, and the recording to give presentations will be available later on our website. So I think I have already said everything what I wanted. So please, Marilyn, you can take up the floor. Thank you.
I think you can hear me now. Okay, so thank you, Inga, and thanks for the introduction. I'm happy to be part of this and also part of the ComAct advisory team, which is a great opportunity for me. As Inga mentioned, I'm the executive director of the Energy Action Project, or inequality as it's mostly known. And we do a lot of reporting on energy poverty across Europe, particularly on our website, Cold at Home, and the address is www.coldathome.today. But I'm not going to talk much about what we do today. I'm just going to introduce the topic and then moderate the discussion. So if we can go to the next slide. I first became aware of this challenge of capturing the multiple benefits of energy efficiency when Nina Campbell, who is going to speak later this morning, and I worked together. I supported her in her research on this publication, and I was just looking at it this morning and remembered about 200 other experts contributed to this. But what Nina was aiming to do in this publication was to look at the benefits of energy efficiency across 5 key areas. One was that macroeconomics, public budgets, health and well-being, which is the most relevant to what we're going to talk about today, industry and delivery of energy. And I've put public budgets and macroeconomics in bold text because I think they both gain when energy efficiency improves health and well-being. And so one of the things I want to focus on later on in the discussion is how much has changed since this publication came out in 2015. And if we can go to the next slide. Nina and her colleagues identified this whole range of potential positive impacts, and they're color-coded in relation to whether it's a benefit to the energy delivery system, whether it's macroeconomic benefit, and then there's sort of everything that's blue and purple and yellow. I think, sorry, I'm looking at a pretty small screen, but there's the broadest range of benefits come to society if energy efficiency measures are put in place. But at the time, it was very difficult to measure the benefits of energy efficiency, to quantify them, and also monetize them. So this whole publication was looking at how do we do those 3 things. And the next slide. In one of the content we have on the Cold at Home website, we took some data from the UK Buildings Research Institute, which I think has since changed its name. But they had data on what are the hazards in a household that end up having costs for the national health system. And there's 9, sorry, something just came up on my screen. There's 9 hazards, falling on the stairs, falling in the bath, fires, damp, mold, and excess cold is one of those. And so when you go to the website, this is actually a bit of an interactive, and you can see that the whole cost to the healthcare system is 1.4 billion, and this was a few years ago, so it may well have changed. But what we want you to do with this interactive is try to match up those 9 risks with the cost bubbles they represent. And if you go to the next slide, what you'll see is that there's excess cold is the biggest cost by far. And so there's 3 things to note. If you could just click, the first one will come up. So excess cold costs the national health system 4 times more than the next hazard. It's 800 million and against 200. The other thing that really struck me is that every other one of these costs is an accident, and being cold at home is not an accident. And the next, if you could click one more time. Cold is a completely avoidable problem, and so the associated costs could be avoided. And this was a very strong feature in the health and well-being chapter of the capturing the multiple benefits of energy efficiency report, is that if you can, address the energy efficiency problem of cold homes, then you save a whole bunch of money at the national healthcare system level. So I'm going to end my presentation there so that we can jump over and talk to the people who have been working on this in a much more detailed way from diverse perspectives. I find it super interesting today that we're hearing from people in the building sector, policy sector, civil society, and research organizations, and also that we're hearing from Belgium, Hungary, North Macedonia, and New Zealand. So I'm going to right away give the floor to Judith Cocat from the Buildings Performance Institute of Europe in Europe, which I know has done a ton of work on this area, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say. So Judith, over to you.
Thank you very much, Marilyn. And you actually already had a very good introduction into what I want to say. So I'm going to go through the slides fairly fastly. So welcome to everybody from my side. My name is Judith Cocat. I'm working at BPIE as a project manager. I've been building modeling for 10 years. And yes, I've looked at many impacts of energy efficiency. And one of them, most recent one that we studied, is the multiple benefits. And what I want to talk to you today about is a little bit on what are multiple benefits and why should we look at them? How are they linked to energy poverty, and what are scientifically evidenced health benefits that we can see from energy efficiency? So when deciding on energy efficiency measures in buildings, all arguments should be included in the decision making. And what we often observe is that multiple benefits that are not easily quantifiable and monetizable, as Marilyn already said, are very hard to integrate in this decision making. So it's very important to know the multiple benefits and their magnitude, their importance for the people that are involved, that are living there, that are owning, in order to make these decisions. I have a similar chart again for the benefits of energy efficiency, and we can cluster them regarding to who is affected, who is benefiting. So we have the whole society, or all people are benefiting if we reduce greenhouse gas emissions and protect our resources. The energy system is also benefiting because we can reduce peak loads, but the single people also benefit. And this is very important when we look at energy poverty as well. We have health benefits, we have security of energy supply. They're not as vulnerable as they are now with regard to energy prices, for example. And they're living in nice and environmentally friendly neighborhoods. So to keep costs down, we can observe that many families, also in small villages, restrict how many rooms they use in the winter, and spend much of their time around wood stoves that they use for cooking and for space and water heating. So the use of traditional fuels impairs their health, especially because they're mostly used in energy poor families. So what can we do about it? So the improved indoor environmental quality has many benefits. We have better comfort, we have well-being, we have an increase in productivity, and also we have an improvement in health. So let's take a deeper dive into these health benefits. Before I just want to say, okay, there are other benefits as well. Energy saving lowers the energy cost, of course. We will dive a little bit more into health, but we also have less noise and pollution from everyday repairs because they're less frequent, and we are more resilient against rising costs due to CO2 prices. So looking at health, so the indoor environmental quality does not only include, but of course it's very important, the thermal environment, but also includes air quality, moisture, lighting, and ventilation and noise. And what we found is a number of health benefits that I want to go into detail now. So we found that dampness and mold in indoor environments over long periods causes respiratory illnesses, such as asthma in adults. So the sources here are really small, but I can share them later. But we found it was found that people living in unhealthy buildings are 40% more likely to suffer from asthma. Also, damp living conditions are strongly linked to childhood illnesses, and the risk of severe health or disability will increases by 25% in early childhood. With regard to cardiovascular health, thermal environment does impact our blood pressure significantly. Also, increased noise levels are associated with higher blood pressure. Also, exposure to road traffic noise is risky for health. Yes. Mental health and mortality. So we know that cold and draft and condensation are even associated with anxiety. Poor housing quality and living in cold, damp housing are associated with hypertension and poor self-rated health. So, you know, the feeling of comfort that you have. Improvement in energy performance reduces energy poverty and improves the mental health. So we encounter that. Energy inefficient housing and winter respiratory diseases in old people is a predictor of winter morbidity, and poor housing conditions demonstrate higher excess winter mortality. So this goes in line with what we just heard about the excess cold. And finally, there's also some implications on productivity and well-being. So we found in our study, which included public buildings, that poor indoor air quality can provoke 6 to 9% productivity loss in employees, that lighting levels are important for the concentration and CO2 levels as well, and that absence from work could be reduced by 3 to okay, no, this is not it. So yes, but if energy efficient buildings can improve sick days by 1.2 to 1.9 days per year. So that was really interesting to find that, and I think that we haven't reached. We still need to look more into quantifying the effect of efficient buildings on people, but I think this is already a quite good start and hopefully a good initiation for the discussion. That would be it from my part, and I'm handing back over. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not able to see the questions if there's been questions posed. So Inga, maybe you could jump in if there has been and let me know if there's been any questions, or just pose them to Judith. Otherwise, we'll jump onto the next presentation and then have questions to all of the panelists in the final session. All right, so thank you, Judith, and we'll go ahead now and move on to Liliana Alcheva, the Deputy Director of Habitat for Humanity in Macedonia, who's going to talk about benefits of energy efficiency, specifically in North Macedonia. And I know this is an area where the housing quality is very poor and there are very high levels of energy poverty. So I'm looking forward to hear what you have to bring us, Liliana.
Thank you. Let me share first the presentation I prepared. I will talk more about the energy efficiency in multifamily apartment buildings, because that's our focus in the past 10 years. There are no many organizations, even institutions or financial institutions, that are dealing with the low-income household living in the multifamily apartment buildings. And this is one of the biggest problems in Macedonia, and I will tell you very briefly why. There are a big number of multifamily apartment buildings. Some of them are very big. It is estimated that around 60% of the people living in urban areas in Macedonia are living in multifamily apartment buildings. There was also in the past 10 years a massive construction, and according to the last census, we have 250,000 dwellings surplus. That doesn't mean that they belong to the low-income household, but they belong to the people who have 2, 3, 4 apartments, and some of them are locked and not used for living. There is a lot very poor coverage with the central heating system that exists only in Skopje, in the capital, and only 8% of the old buildings are connected to the central heating. Most of the buildings are very old. 30 and 50 years, and especially in Skopje, when there are the most of the multifamily apartment buildings, those was built after the earthquake in 1963, using unquality material that was at that time it was important to put people under the roof and not take not pay very much attention of the quality of the construction. There are many other challenges. Some of them were mentioned in the previous discussions. One of the main issues that Habitat Macedonia is dealing with is inconsistent legislative and lack of supportive mechanisms who can support the low-income household to improve the energy efficiency of their homes. I will show you a few slides about some research that we as a Habitat Macedonia have been done under the frame of other USAID finance project called Residential Energy Efficiency for the Low-Income Household. It was implemented in 2 municipalities, and we were covering around 900 households, which was 10% of the all households living in multifamily apartment buildings in these 2 municipalities. I will show you the results from Gheorghe Petrov, which are very similar with the results of Veles. Gheorghe Petrov is one municipality in Skopje, in the capital, and Veles is another town on the south of, on the central Macedonia. So people are receiving very low incomes. Their incomes are, for the majority of surveyed people, are around 450 euros. The highest income, very small amount, are receiving income over 1,000 euro. That shows that in the multifamily apartment buildings are living really people who have low incomes. Another problem here with the income is that, and to identify who are actually the energy poor household living in multifamily apartment buildings, is that in those buildings are living few, but still there are living some rich people. So having in mind that the apartment has an ownership, 98% of the apartments are privately owned, that complicates the situation with implementing energy efficiency measures in the multifamily apartment buildings. Most of those who are living in the multifamily apartment buildings are using electricity, thermal stoves for heating. 93% in Skopje, which also it becomes a bigger problem now with the increasing price of electricity. Until now, the government was regulated somehow the electricity price, but now with all this crisis that happened in the past year, the electricity from 1st of July, the prices will increase significantly. That will affect the low-income household for sure. And here about their interest to do upgrades of their apartments, we have a bigger problem with energy efficiency of the common spaces because of the inherited behavior that citizens have from the socialism. At that time, the government was taking care about the common spaces, the common areas in the multifamily apartment buildings. And here you can see that the most popular measure was the replacement of windows and entrance doors only on their own apartments, because people feel that belongs to them and not the common areas. And speaking about the common areas, almost 70% there was no taken any of energy efficiency measures. This maybe Esther will tell you more about the research that has been done under the ComAct project, but you can see here that Macedonia has the highest energy poverty indicators among all other countries that are included into the project. And one of the main problem is the delay with the payment of the energy bills, which is really big problem for the low-income household. I will not comment on this slide, but just to mention that this is a kind of the system that can support households for the energy efficiency upgrades, and all of these circles that I have here are not fully implemented in Macedonia, as you can see. The commercial banks have some credit lines for the energy efficiency, but most of the money are going to the individual houses because no one wants to deal with 100 different homeowners and with their problems, issues, and social economic status, and so on and so on. And for now, Habitat Macedonia is the only organization who can provide loans for the low-income household living in multi-family apartment buildings and offer loans to the homeowner association. According to our research, 40% of our clients, credit clients, loan clients, are actually pensioners that are not eligible clients for the commercial banks. That the energy efficiency measure are having effects and benefits for the homeowners was proved in many ways. This is how our revolving fund is functioning. It's a complicated slide. I will not go into the details because there is no time for that now. I will focus only on the benefits that are already proved in our work, that actually the household who renovated the building, renovated the apartments and renovated the building with the common areas in the building can make an energy savings 30 to 50%. One of the problems with the central heating is that it's area-based calculation for the costs. It's not with the heat meters. But still at the level of the building, there is a system that can be adjusted according and adjust the temperature into each of the apartments. There are, for those families who are living in multi-family apartment buildings heated with electricity or other energy sources, there was evidence of a 30% decreased cost for heating. And there is a difference between the central and individual heating system. And we've tried also to put that put that into the amount of money. Monthly household can make savings up to 25 euros. And if we calculate that as an investment for the renovation of the building, that investment will pay off after 7 years. If they are using a Habitat loan after 7 years, with the savings that they will produce on their family budget, the investment will be paid. So what we are using as for the low-income household is the subsidies from the municipalities. This is the model where we have developed 6 different financial models, but this was the most used model. I will tell you what, this is very popular because some of the municipalities are providing subsidies for the common areas in the range of 25 up to 100%. And about 50% of the renovating buildings through Habitat Macedonia, which is 72 multifamily apartment buildings with around 3,000 apartments or 3,000 households, they received 100% subsidies from the municipalities for the facade. Actually, it's a grant for the facade of the building. And it happened only in Skopje municipalities. In other towns, municipal budget is lower, so the municipalities cannot afford to give so much amount of money for the poor household. Another model is that municipality, and this was also experienced in Prilep, municipality was supporting only the low-income household, those who are on the social welfare or have a disabled person in their home. And according our opinion as a Habitat, we think that this model is more right-based than the previous one, because from the previous one also households who have a higher income can benefit from the municipality. And another model is solidarity among homeowners to cover the cost for those who are the most vulnerable in their building, but this is a very rare example. Let's go for the conclusions. The model from the subsidies of municipality is very good for the demonstration project, but is not sustainable and cannot be used on a long term because the municipality cannot allocate so much of their budget for the renovation of the private ownership. Also, until now, we are working on this program and operating, as I'm saying, on steroids, because we are putting a lot of efforts to keep all this system works. And it will not work if there is no people who are facilitating all these processes. And we're still lagging behind, but in Macedonia, we really need to offer a proper solution, a systematic approach to the problem for the low-income household and energy efficiency to have a fully benefits from that. And that also includes all stakeholders in the sector, commercial sector, private civil society sector, and also the national and local institutions who needs to be a leading partner in these processes. Thank you very much. That's all from me.
That was super interesting, Liliana. Thank you so much for that. And I have a few questions that I'm going to ask you in the discussion period. I'm super excited to hear what we're going to hear next from Esther Töre, a researcher at the Metropolitan Research Institute in Hungary, in Budapest, Hungary. Because I think this question is massively important. What do vulnerable households actually think about energy efficiency? And, you know, they know it's disruptive. Do they understand the technology of it? Do they think it's valuable? These are all sort of the questions that come to my mind from our experience, where people just find it overwhelming in so many ways. So Esther, I'm very happy to hand the floor to you.
Thank you very much, Marilyn. Hi, everyone. In my presentation, I will talk about the survey we made in ComAct project. The survey was conducted in last autumn, and it covered a lot of topics which are connected to the project, but we also so the questionnaire also contained some questions regarding the attitudes of people, of the respondents, and my presentation will focus on how to engage vulnerable households in building renovation, focusing on their willingness to contribute financially. This question is important because of two things. One is this shows how households perceive renovation and the question of energy efficiency, how valuable it is for them, and the other relevance of this topic is that it's important that the decision makers know what groups they should give special attention to, and which groups need more public support than the average. Okay, so about the survey, it was conducted in 5 countries, which are the pilot countries of the ComAct project: Hungary, Bulgaria, Lithuania, North Macedonia, and Ukraine. The total respondent number is 1,025. In most countries, it was 200 people, 200 households, and in Lithuania it was a bit more. The target population of the research were homeowners, because in the post-socialist countries, the ComAct project focuses on home ownership is very high. So we were focusing on homeowners and living in multi-family buildings. And another criteria for targeting the respondents was that we targeted people who are who has a lower than average income, or the buildings are in a worse technical condition than the average building. So this survey is not about the most vulnerable few percent, but rather group of people who need public support, who need assistance, who are struggling with making the ends meet, but they are not those people who are the typical energy poor people who are the most vulnerable. There are two big topics of the questionnaire, and I will talk only about the second one. So the questionnaire and the research also covered the factors behind energy poverty, both technical and social factors, and you can read about these this part of the research, this topic, in our study, which was published also not only in English, but also it was translated in into the five languages of the 5 pilot countries. This presentation will focus on people's attitudes towards renovation, especially contribution to a renovation of the multi-family building they live in. Just for you to see the context, so what kind of population we are talking about. So the survey was conducted in cities, in urban areas, and due to demographics of these areas, and also due to the sample size, this survey represents the population with a higher age on average than the total population of the countries, and also there were very few children in the survey, which means that there are no families with many children included. So mostly there were 1, maximum 2 children in this household, which means that a very important group, families with many children, are not represented in this research, and there were a lot of single-person households. Based on the data we received, the most vulnerable group is single pensioners, so which are obviously mostly women. So either from an income perspective and either from energy poverty perspective, pensioners, and especially single pensioners, turned out to be the most vulnerable in this specific sample, in this research. The neighborhoods covered by the research are stable neighborhoods, so they are not slums, but as I said, they are in a lower social status than the average neighborhoods in the countries. And so this is important because it shows that the results we received are from are about a population and condominiums in which there are more energy poor households than the average. So the main topic of this presentation is what make these residents financially contribute to renovation. Again, this is important to have designing grant schemes, financial schemes, but in general, we think that financing renovations and supporting energy poor people is the responsibility of the public sphere, of states and municipalities. But still, it's important to see how people, how homeowners look at these topics, because their cooperation is also crucial as we are talking about privately owned dwellings. So we asked the question in two forms. So we asked the respondents how much would they pay for a renovation in one amount as a lump sum, and we also asked how much they could pay in installments per month. And it was surprising to see that a pretty high number of people said that they would be willing to contribute to the renovation. We also asked about the amount, but this. So I'm talking about now the general general attitudes of people. So as you can see on the first figure, in every country, the majority of respondents said that they would be willing to pay for a renovation, and in some countries, it even the 2/3 of respondents said that. So in Bulgaria and Lithuania, it's above the 2/3. And also in Ukraine, it's almost 2/3 of the respondents. If we look at the second figure, we can see that people in everywhere except from Ukraine, people prefer to pay in installments, which is not a big surprise, as obviously for most people, for most lower income people, it's more comfortable to pay in installments, but it's very important to highlight, because in many cases decision makers design financial schemes which expect people to provide big amount of money in as a lump sum, and it is very it discriminates lower income people who have lower amount of spare money, and in Ukraine it's a different situation. Of course, the survey was conducted before the war, so this is a result from 2021. But our Ukrainian colleagues said that this slightly counterintuitive result is possible because many people in Ukraine have cash at home, and they find renovation, energy efficient renovation, a good way to invest their money. in the second step, we our question in the research was what influences the amount of money someone would give for renovation, and we used a measure about the amount of money relative to their utility costs. Of course, the most decisive factor is income level of the household or the subjective financial situation of the household. In some countries, there were some special results, but I'm running out of time, so you will be able to read it when we share these materials. Another very interesting result was that younger respondents are willing to pay more than respondents above 60 years. Possible reasons for that is that in our sample, as I mentioned, elderly people have lower income. Also, probably elderly people find the renovation very uncomfortable, and it causes more problem for them, and they are also they might be less interested in increasing the value of the property. Another interesting result was that those who have children are willing to pay more. So if we control every other relevant variable, we still still see that parents of children are willing to pay more for a renovation. We also looked at the effect of how the community works and how the respondent evaluates the management. In the table, you can see on the left that what are the attitudes which make people pay more in installments or pay less in installments, and on the other half of the table you can see the same, but in a lump sum. So we can see that people have different approaches to the two kind of payment, and in some countries these soft variables, so these attitudes are not very important. So for example, in Lithuania, however, in the whole sample, it's a general pattern that those who perceive area problems in the buildings, so those who think that many people in the building have areas in the common costs, they are less willing to pay, and also those who are dissatisfied with the community are less willing to pay in most countries. But interestingly, those who perceive problems with the maintenance, so those who are dissatisfied with the management of the building, are more willing to pay, which was surprising for us, but possible explanation of this could be that those people feel more responsibility for the building, and they care more for the general condition of the building. So even though they are critical of the management, they would improve the situation, and they would give money for renovation. So I don't know, out of time, so I won't take the time to conclude, but here are some takeaways, and you will have the time to check it when we send the slides. Thank you for your attention.
we're actually a little bit ahead of time, Esther. So if you want to take a couple of minutes to go through your last slide, please do. Maybe bring up 1 or 2 points.
Okay, thank you so much. This is basically a concluding slide. So what I would highlight is maybe the last point of the first column. So education level is less important than expected. So we looked at the effect of education level, because we thought that maybe those who are higher educated are more engaged in renovations, and they have more information, and thus they probably would pay more for renovation. But it turned out, the education level turned out to be insignificant. In cases, so higher educated people, if higher educated people pay more for the renovation, this is because they earn more. So this is the effect of the income, not the education. But the education level in itself was important only in Ukraine, but not in other countries, which means that, or which may suggest that probably these kind of these information kind of differences within communities are less important than income and demographic aspects, and there are some policy implications of our results. We think that financial schemes need to be developed in all cases in a way that it enables payment in installments and doesn't need one big amount of payment. Financial schemes for renovations must include the grant element for low-income owners, because income is the strongest. So income is the variable which influences the willingness to pay the most. This may sound evident, but for many decision makers it is not, unfortunately. And when designing support schemes, special attention should be paid for elderly people, especially for single pensioners, because they are the ones, in our research, they turned out to be the ones who suffer the most from energy poverty, but at the same time they are the ones who can contribute the less for renovation. And another very important policy implication is that building trust in the community and creating a cohesion among the residents is very important. So strengthening the institutions, homeowners associations, and building management is has to be a very important policy goal. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Esther. It was really valuable to have those that last slide and those last inputs and observations. All right, so you know, we still don't have any questions, but one of the things I'm going to encourage people to do who are listening in is just to type into the chat who you are, and what country you're from and what organization you represent, so that we have a better understanding amongst the participants who's who and why you're listening in, and maybe that will prompt people to ask some more questions. But certainly the panel discussion is coming up, and now we're going to shift over to Nina Campbell. And Nina, I'm really interested to hear about how, having authored this first report on the multiple benefits of energy efficiency and really looking at it from a global and an academic perspective. Now that you're with a senior policy advisor at New Zealand's Ministry for Energy and Resources, how can you start to put that into place? So Nina, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Marilyn. Thanks for the introduction and the recognition for that work done back at the IEA. That was a really fascinating project to be part of, and really did set me on a course. I think it was a real light bulb moment for me to realise the really critical role that energy efficiency is playing at a sort of macro economic level as well as in people's individual lives. So I've really followed that path ever since. So it'd be interesting to have a bit of a chat about that at the end. Today, I'm actually going to talk mostly about what we're doing in New Zealand on energy poverty, or energy hardship as we call it. So I will just share my screen and get those slides going. I hope you can see that. Yeah, okay. So I'll give you a quick overview of New Zealand's housing stock, as I imagine many of you might not have a clear picture of that. And then I'll talk a little bit about how we think about energy hardship in New Zealand, and the work we're doing on definitions. And then I'll just run through some of the key programs that we have underway in New Zealand, some of which are in pilot stage, because as I'll explain, we're at sort of the beginning of a journey, I guess, in addressing energy hardship in some ways in New Zealand. So quite a lot going on. And then I'll revisit the multiple benefits perspective on all of that and talk a little bit about how I think that is motivating action in New Zealand. So New Zealand is a small country of around 5 million people. And we have about 1.7 million dwellings in New Zealand. Most of those are detached single-family dwellings of the type you can see here in these pictures. I guess get a sense of the sort of the spread that is typical of housing in New Zealand. The other thing that's really typical of housing in New Zealand is that it tends to be of relatively low quality. Being a pioneering country, we have a legacy of very simply built wooden weatherboard housing, which typically did not include any insulation. I suppose pioneer settlers arriving in New Zealand found mostly from UK and Northern Europe found the weather to be quite mild, and probably underestimated how extreme the winters can get, especially in terms of dampness. And all of you listening will probably be aware of the effects that damp and cold can have on health and mental well-being as well. So we do have a problem in New Zealand. We're addressing that. We've introduced insulation standards into the building code only in 1977, but that has, since that time, we've been working towards improving housing stock. But we do have, as I said, mainly detached houses. So only about 15% of homes are multifamily or joined dwellings in New Zealand. A fair chunk of those are actually owned by the social housing provider Kāinga Ora in New Zealand, owns about 65,000 properties, and actually a lot of those are detached dwellings as well, but we're expecting a significant amount of building to go on in the future, and most of that will be multi-family development. In more recent times, we see the benefits of a higher density living are becoming very clear. And the other thing to note, I think, is that buildings in New Zealand consume about 15% of total final energy. We're mostly reliant on electricity in the residential sector, although there is, I've got another slide on that actually. Yeah, about 15% of our energy consumption in the residential sector. But electricity in New Zealand is about 80% renewable. So decarbonisation is not the main driver of the activity in this space. It's really driven by the issue with housing quality, as well as low income in New Zealand. So a little bit about what we're doing then in energy hardship in New Zealand. So although we've had this very long history of housing quality issues, real progress on energy hardship or the alleviation of energy hardship in New Zealand kicked off in around 2019 actually, with the issue of a electricity price review, which was commissioned by the government at the time, who wanted to look at whether our electricity pricing system was fair and equitable, and not take that perspective in addition to thinking about efficiency and competitiveness of pricing, and really take a consumer's point of view. So that was a really powerful review which issued a range of recommendations relating to the issue of energy hardship in New Zealand and the need to address it. And what it pointed out is that the causes of energy hardship extend beyond the electricity sector actually, and that the solutions require joint action from a range of actors across the economy and society, which has stimulated a huge amount of discussion and activity, I suppose, because it implicated a lot of people and across different sectors. And on the slide here, you can see just 3 of the key activities that have taken place since that time. One of them was the nomination of an independent energy hardship expert panel. And their objective is to develop policy recommendations for the minister to consider by June next year. So they're spending 2 years to look at evidence and consult to develop those recommendations. They're also drawing on input of an energy hardship reference group, which had the objective of drawing on expertise and insight from across the industry, recognizing that actually in the absence of really strong government activity, most of the knowledge was actually sitting outside of government, and wanting to draw on that in that sort of decision-making, policy-making process. And then another really important piece of work, although sometimes it is perceived as relatively academic, it's actually really critical to getting our policy settings right and being able to track how we're doing in addressing energy hardship, is the development of a definition of energy hardship for New Zealand. Obviously, there are, we were able to take a lead from places like the UK and the work done by the IEA in defining what energy hardship looks like and what the drivers tend to be. But the work that the ministry is doing at the moment is around developing a locally relevant, really specific definition that also speaks to cultural elements that are really critical in New Zealand. We have Indigenous population, the Māori people here, who unfortunately overrepresented in low-income sector of society and in poor housing. So a really key audience to integrate into our response to energy hardship. So that definition will be coming out officially later this year, as we're just drawing to the end of quite a in-depth consultation process around that. And I'll perhaps just share a little bit more about how that's looking. I think in my opening slide, I showed this concept of a continuum. So I know that in Europe, we talk about energy poverty. Here, we talk about energy hardship, which I think is around destigmatizing the experience of energy poverty or energy hardship. And we're also thinking about it in terms of a continuum where, particularly in these difficult economic times, that actually it's not always the people who are formally in poverty who are experiencing energy hardship, and it is more of a continuum of people who can sort of move up and down that continuum depending on how economic and personal circumstances change from time to time. And obviously this positive framing around energy well-being is where we're trying to get to in New Zealand, although the language is still fairly loaded in the hardship space. We are framing all of our interventions around trying to support well-being, energy well-being. And so this colourful expression here is the proposed definition that is very close to how we expect it to land. So when individuals, households and whānau, which is Māori word for family, are able to obtain adequate energy services to support their well-being in their home or kāinga, and kāinga being a household. And we've also sort of gone a little bit further than the traditional 3 drivers of energy poverty. and broken that down further, really just with the objective of supporting the development of more nuanced solutions and engaging that broader range of actors across the economy that we're trying to engage. And part of that work will also be around developing indicators that we'll be using to track our progress, to set a baseline for where we're at in energy hardship, and then track our progress over time as well. And we have been watching very closely at what's happening in other countries, particularly in Europe, around the measurement of energy poverty. And we are looking to use the indicators like percentage of income in relationship to median income, but also subjective measures like the experience of feeling cold at home and the presence of mold and damp in homes. So that is sort of where that's the perspective we're taking. In terms of actual action, there is quite a few things going on. The first of which is the Womakiwi Homes program, which is our national home retrofit program. And this is one of the programs, or this is actually an evolved version of one of the programs that was focused on in the IEA's work in 2015. It provides a grant subsidy to low-income households for floor and ceiling insulation, where there is either none at all or inadequate insulation in place, and install of a clean, efficient heating system for the living area, which tends to be an electric heat pump. Again, with renewable electricity being our preferred resource in New Zealand. So targeting low-income homeowners, I think as is mentioned in some of the other programs today, we're targeting on the basis of being already a beneficiary of social welfare through community services cards. That's our indicator. That's an income-based services card, as well as taking a geographic approach, or using geographical deprivation zones, which is sort of neighbourhood by neighbourhood. So targeting the lowest decile neighbourhoods for treatment. And the other way that we bring families or households into the program is through the Healthy Homes Initiative, which is a health-driven initiative where people presenting in the health system with respiratory or cardiovascular illnesses that have been linked to cold, damp housing can get an immediate referral into the program, whether they meet the other criteria or not. Which is great, because that's sort of the safety net that catches some of the worst cases, which we would hate to see slip through the cracks. So we're retrofitting about 30,000 homes a year. Still quite a bit of work to do there, though. We also have, so the Womakiwi Homes program is only available to home owners, owner-occupiers. So for the rental space, we have the Healthy Home Standards, which again, relatively recent, only came into force in 2019. But they require all landlords to meet a minimum standard in order to be able to rent their property. So ceiling underfloor insulation, heating, ventilation, and drainage are all part of those requirements. The challenge with that program is that tenants hesitate to, the challenge is compliance and enforcement, because tenants are reluctant to raise the alarm on landlords that are not complying for fear of being evicted or facing other sorts of consequences. And the other implication is rental price rises. We have seen instances of landlords passing the cost of retrofitting properties onto tenants, which is obviously a negative outcome especially for low-income families who usually aren't not in a position to absorb that kind of increase. So there are a lot of challenges around these programs. The other one I would mention, though, which is very important, is the home retrofit program being delivered by our state housing provider, Kāinga Ora. This is relatively small scale at the moment, but will be an ongoing project over time. They are, as I said, have got quite a broad portfolio of housing of different types, both detached and multifamily dwellings, and are working slowly through retrofitting all of that stock up to or beyond the building code. I'll carry on. So we've also got a few, so those are sort of our stock standard programs that have been rolling quite well over the last few years, but in the last year or two, we have kicked off a couple of pilot programs, which are enabling us to trial different sort of innovative ways of supporting energy affordability for low-income families. And we are treating these as in the nature of pilots. They're relatively small scale, but what's great about this work is that there is a really strong element of impact evaluation attached to each of them, which was one of the key sort of measures of success for taking a multiple benefits approach, is that we really need to be able to measure impact in order to quantify it and talk about the multiple impacts that these programs are having. So one of those programs is called Support for Energy Education in Communities. And really that's around support for knowledge, energy literacy, and support for navigation of the energy system and energy prices for low-income households. We've had 2 funding rounds to date, and a third is just about to open. It's relatively small scale, but again, the intention with this fund is to support work that's already going on in the community in order to enable government to get a sense of what is working, what is happening first of all, and what is working. So having a contestable fund available has drawn a lot of projects out of the woodwork, and we've been able to spotlight those programs and support them to do more. And with the evaluation component of the program, we're learning a lot about what works through those programs, or we hope to. Actually, you know, the results of those evaluations are not yet in, but we're looking forward to them. And the other is actually on the energy generation side. So a fund to support community renewable energy projects on Māori and public housing. So actually, you'll see at the bottom of the slide, there's a brand new allocation of funding, which is wider than Māori and public housing. It's fit for any homeowners with different eligibility criteria. But the initial funding that was allocated in 2021 is really around, was focused on some key need areas. So the public housing stock, 50% of that money went to Kāinga Ora to support those retrofit programs. And the other 50% has been allocated in a contestable process over 3 funding rounds, and is supporting about 40 small scale community owned and for community benefit renewable energy projects on either Māori housing or Māori owned land. And we are trying to support innovative models with that funding. The primary objective is around contributing to affordable energy, but also, as with all of the work in the energy hardship space in New Zealand, really motivated by health and wellbeing outcomes as well. The other aspect of that fund is around energy sovereignty for Māori communities, which is really a critical piece, because as I mentioned earlier, Māori communities tend to be overrepresented in the low income and energy hardship group. So giving them the opportunity to have control over their energy supply and actually boost energy literacy and build capability at the same time has been a really powerful part of that program. Decarbonisation is one of the objectives, but less so. I mentioned the new funding, but what's different about the new funding is that we're going to be targeting remote communities. So looking at energy access and energy security issues, as well as energy hardship, and really looking for the intersection of those 2 challenges. So I'm just about at the end here, but I just wanted to touch on the multiple benefits of energy efficiency again here, and just speak to the fact that there really are a huge range of drivers for this government activity, as well as the huge range of community activity that's going on. but the number one driver remains improved health, and I think everybody today has spoken to that point, particularly in terms of the outcomes for children, the elderly, and those with disabilities who are more likely to be at home. In New Zealand, well-being from a sort of broader social perspective, mental health, but also social connectedness has been a really important driver more recently. We're now working within a framework of well-being across government in all sectors, which has enabled a little bit of more openness to a multiple benefits mindset in thinking about policy impact. Affordability, obviously, and energy literacy, and the just transition is another broad concept which sort of underpins all of this work, which is making sure that the energy transition brings everybody along with it. So equity is really at the core of everything that we're doing with emissions reduction in New Zealand. I think I better stop there because I have a feeling I've run over. I've just got one slide which I'll leave you with, which is just to give a sense of all of the other things that are happening in New Zealand on this topic.
Great, thanks, Nina. It was super informative. So I just let you keep going. Good. So a few people have introduced themselves in the chat, but we don't yet have any questions. So I'm going to, I've got a couple of questions in mind, but I'm also going to leave it open to the panelists to ask questions of each other. What struck me, though, across the four presentations is there's kind of four overarching challenges that are interrelated. And one is certainly the financing aspect, and how can you make the financial case for energy efficiency in a way that triggers policy action. So I think that that's sort of, you know, comments or questions to each other about that is interesting. And the second part is really, how do you engage these people who, you know, often when we do reporting on people who are facing energy hardship or energy poverty, they're very distrustful of government, and they it's difficult in some ways to get them to think about, because there's such a precarious paycheck to paycheck lifestyle that is difficult to get them to think about investment rather than cost. And so how do we engage with those people, and how do we get them to think about energy efficiency as actually an investment in their own future, recognizing that their access to financing is extremely, extremely difficult. So I'm going to open up the floor to anybody who wants to address any of those questions. And then just in the last few minutes, I'm going to give you a couple of slides about a program that I think is really interesting, and then potentially some tools that could be useful to anybody. So does anybody want to jump in? Judith, one of the things that struck me while you were talking is, how can we use modeling to make the financial case for energy efficiency?
Yes, I think, I hope you can hear me well. I think the business case for housing or for buildings is one of the things that has been more and more present in my mind, also due to the rising energy prices, due to the rising real estate prices, and also due to the what also Nina mentioned is the pressure on tenants with regard to their landlords. And you know, we have this certification system, and people are actually never asking for the certificates, because if they're the one asking, then they will give the apartment to the other person. So there is really some challenges there that need to be addressed with regard to the business case of a building, really, because for me it's almost more critical, of course, for people who are with energy hardship. I really like that term. But in general, you know, you have the market, and then, you know, this is giving you some payback for the living space, but it's really dependent on what people earn and what they can afford. And of course, a better building has a higher standard to it. So how do we? The only way to really make that happen is to say, okay, we're going to take care of it, and we're going to I think subsidies, and we've seen that in Southern and Central Eastern Europe, where whole building block apartments and they're are owned by the people that live in them, but the coordination of the measure is done by a public institution that is also taking care of the public spaces. And I'm really looking forward to hear more on that from Liliana, because you can probably tell a book about this situation.
Great. Liliana, do you want to jump in right away and respond to that?
Yes, sure. I mean, one of the main problem is the ownership, and dealing really with, there are buildings with 70, 114 apartments that we have been working on, and dealing with 114 different behavior, different attitudes, it's really a big problem. And also, when we are talking that all these things are happening in the environment which doesn't have any system to support this kind of initiative. So there is no affirmative legislation to support those, that kind of initiative. Also, the management of multifamily apartment buildings is very weak. And financial institutions are not considering the multifamily apartment buildings as a market to offer their loans, but also there is no developed real estate market in Macedonia. So all these things putting together creates the bigger problem than it looks like, and putting the low-income household or energy poor household into the center of that problem is very difficult. At the moment, there is no solution except case-by-case situation where the municipalities are approaching to us and ask us to facilitate the process, also supporting the municipalities to prepare the required documents to fit into their obligation according to the law. And at this moment, we are really doing as a Habitat Macedonia on different fronts, as I can say, and it's not very sustainable position, our position, but also is not a sustainable situation for supporting energy efficiency in the low-income household. For the moment, except raising awareness, putting a lot of efforts in education, in training, it's the only way to cope with this situation.
Great. And I'm going to give Nina the floor to respond or ask a question next.
Thanks, Marilyn. Yeah, really interesting questions, because I could see that the approach is sort of different in each country. I mean, our experience in New Zealand is that people in the low income context are really not willing to pay for home renovation. I think they can see the value of it, but most of the people that we're targeting, we're finding that they just don't have the available cash to invest. You know, that in principle, they might agree that it's an important or useful investment, but in practice, that's not where the money goes. It goes on food, it goes on health bills and school and that sort of thing. So for us, it was really just if we want to reach those homes, it has to be as much of a subsidy as possible. Even in a lot of the really high deprivation areas, we actually get to 100% subsidy by partnering with community groups, so that the government subsidy is 80% or so, and that extra 20 comes from a local community group who's willing to top that up in recognition of the need in certain households. But I was really interested to hear Esther's survey results, that there was actually a real willingness to pay, and I wonder if that's reflective of a sort of more of a median income response, or if that's just a cultural difference. Maybe while I've got the floor, just on you mentioned as well, Marilyn, I think a really good point is how hard it is to reach those in energy poverty, energy hardship. And again, I think it's that sort of bandwidth or the time and energy to think about energy efficiency as a solution is very hard to find for those in energy hardship. And we've found that the really key key strategy for overcoming that is to work with trusted community actors that are already in the field. And so we've been running programs to give home performance training to financial and budget advisors, to health and sort of family violence services. You know, any of those services that are already in the community and are already trusted seems to be the best way for us to get through. I wonder if that's anyone else's experience.
An example that I'm going to show you in a minute that is definitely part of the experience. But I see that Esther would like to have an intervention as well. So Esther, go ahead.
Thanks. I would like to reflect on Nina's comment. So regarding our research. So first of all, willingness to pay actually in practice is something which is very hard to measure in a questionnaire. So of course, it's a totally different situation when someone asks you that in theory, would you be contribute to renovation than to actually paying. But I think it can, so the questionnaire result can underestimate and overestimate the actual willingness to contribute. So both it can, so the real contributions can be even higher or lower, because in some cases probably some people say that I don't want to give money, but if they can see a real project which it can motivate them better than a surveyor who just asks questions. So yes, but I think the most vulnerable people who are really the poorest, don't know, 10%, 5% of the population, I think wouldn't give probably any contribution to renovation. So I think the situation in Hungary is, and the other pilot countries probably, but I'm not as familiar with those contexts, are similar. But the population we targeted was more like lower middle class people, to summarize it. And I think which is an important implication of our result is that in this lower middle class environment and low income but urban and multi-family environment, I think there are a lot of other obstacles which are not financial. So there are organizational obstacles and technical obstacles, and they are also important. And I think if there is a housing manager or homeowners association who really takes the lead in the organization process of the renovation, many people could give a few money, a little contribution to participate in the process.
Thank you. We've pretty much come to the end of our time, and I don't think there's any questions from the participants. I hope it's been an interesting chance for you. And if you're willing to stay on for 2 more minutes, Inga, I'll get you to put up the slide about eco-reso habitat. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And I wanted to bring this project to your attention because it's such an interesting model, and it's a social innovation project. So it's not heavily reliant on donations or government grants, but it taps into government grants and into policies in a way that's really interesting. So Reso Eco Habitat is a French-based social innovation program, and it really tackles 2 of the challenges that we brought up, the financing and the engagement. So Reso Eco Habitat is primarily a building renovation company, but they recognized that they wanted to work in the renovation to tackle energy poverty space. And they're business model works on at the finance level, what they do with a particular household is they sit down and they figure out what are all the subsidies you might be eligible for. You know, if you're low income, if you could get subsidies for your windows, if you have some sort of disability that we can do renovations related to the accessibility in your house. And often they find that they're able to get to about 80% of the cost of the home renovation covered by this full set of subsidies. And what that then enables them to do is take that individual to a financial institution and get a loan for the remaining 20 or 15 or whatever percent. And in the end, this also enables these people who have really never had a positive interaction with a bank to get a credit rating. And the second part of the equation is the engagement part. And Réseau Ecohabitat recognizes that from the time they first identify a household they'd like to help until the renovations are actually finished is often about 2 years. And this reflects the time that it takes to do the research about the subsidies, do the renovation planning, and execute the renovations. And so that is a super long time for people who already live in precarious situations. And what they do is they partner with the Réseau Caritas France, which is a Catholic volunteer organization. And each household, one of the volunteers from Réseau Caritas will stay with a household during that 2-year period. And they help that person learn about budgeting. They help sort of translate what the technical side of the renovation discussion about is, to make sure that person understands what the technical people are talking about, walks them through the process of doing the research on subsidies, walks them through the process of filling out a loan application for that remaining 20%. And so this really is a super resource intensive project or process, but it works in a way that I find is really, really interesting. And I'm just going to get Inga to switch to one more slide, because there's a few resources I want people, oh, sorry, the next one after that. Yeah, there's a couple of resources, and again, you can just do a couple of clicks here so everything shows up. So there's a couple of resources that have recently been put together by the Cost Engager Network, and this is a group of European academics and practitioners who have been working on the right to energy. So they have developed a right to energy toolkit that can help practitioners or policymakers bring this discussion to policy. What does it really mean to have a right to energy? And from a policy framework, what do you need to do to support that? And then how does that relate to a dignified life? And ENACT worked really closely with the Engager Network to produce this report, but also we produced a series of 4 podcasts that are relevant to this. And the one that I think is the most interesting, and I've put a bit.ly link there where you can access the toolkit and then also get links to the podcast. But there's one podcast that talks about how does the right to energy relate to the right to a dignified life. And so I very much encourage you to have a look at that toolkit and listen to some of those podcasts, which give people a chance to really talk in depth about something they're really passionate about and working on from academic and policy perspectives. So I think that kind of wraps us up for today. I'm really grateful for the people who participated. The last slide there just shows kind of the range of things that ENACT has become involved in. And so we're super happy to become involved in more. And Inga, I'll leave you to wrap up if there's anything else you want to cover.
Yeah, thank you all for giving your presentations, taking part in discussion and answering our questions. I hope that you will bring something from our webinar, and the same for the audience. And so just let's keep on exchanging on our work, important activities which we are doing here. And so we'll see you soon. And yeah, so I just would like to close our event for today and wish you a nice day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Roberta, do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, we